joins us now. Matt, of course, is a regular on the show. Matt, welcome back, and thanks for joining us. The last time we talked, you seem to be have maybe just a little bit of hesitation in your view that Ukraine can successfully defend itself. What's the status of things as you see them now? Has Russia gained an upper hand as Ukraine pushed them back, or are things the same as they were? Or is there some other state of affairs from when we spoke last about 7 days ago?
Things are largely the same. There's more pressure on the town of Bakhmut, which has seen fighting for the past several months. There's reports today that Ukraine blew a bridge leading from Bakhmut to Konstantinivka, which is actually the city that I did a live appearance with you from when I was deployed to the front line several months ago. So that city looks like it will fall. The Russians are pushing a little bit of offensive at numerous points along the front line, but they haven't massed tanks and artillery for a major push yet. They've been sort of doing probing attacks and mostly getting repelled, except for around Bakhmut, where it really looks like the city is going to fall in a week or two, I would say.
Does it appear to you that this massive force that intelligence has been saying publicly, it's not secret, is coming, this 300,000 to 500,000 troops, some conscripts, mainly National Guard, all trained, that President Putin has amassed this enormous army? Does it appear to you that they're in Russia and ready to move into Ukraine?
They could still be in Russia. We haven't seen them come into Ukraine. There's not a massing of forces for a major push. It looks like they are coming, but they're coming in a slow roll rather than a mass in one giant push. So until there's reports of large formations getting ready for an offensive, we haven't seen it yet. There's speculation it could be coming on the 24th, but really, I'm not sure Russia has the logistics to really put everything that they put together into the field yet. But they're moving stuff forward for sure.
What is the story with the weather and the ground conditions? For a while, we were told tanks will only operate well when the earth is frozen. So my question to you now is, it's the middle of February. It's a mild winter here in the U.S., but is the earth frozen? And then we were told the Russian offensive is going to come in the spring. Well, I would imagine in the spring, the earth is not frozen and it's muddy, and that's obviously not the conditions you want for tanks. Can you educate us on that, please?
Right. Well, the peak time of the ground here is usually January and February. That would be the ideal time for an offensive. This is part of why Russia tried to launch the campaign last year in late February. They are running out of time. The ground is going to start getting mushy. It's been kind of a mild winter lately, so a lot of the snow has thawed in areas, and it is getting a bit muddy in some places. But really, the clock is ticking for the ground conditions to be good. Another issue is that part of why a Russian offensive will be complicated is because Ukraine has spent a lot of time mining anti-personnel and anti-vehicle mines along these front lines, which is also going to complicate the advance in addition to ground conditions.
I want to run a clip from the Secretary General of NATO, Secretary Stoltenberg, and ask for your comments on it. He's discussing, it's a brief clip, maybe 15 or 17 seconds. He's discussing the inability of the NATO countries to meet the demand for ammunition that Ukraine is using.
The war in Ukraine is consuming an enormous amount of ammunition and depleting Allied stockpiles. The current rate of Ukraine's ammunition expenditure is many times higher than our current rate of production. This puts our defense industries under strain.
Many times higher than our current rate of production. So if Ukraine is using 1,000 rounds of a given type of ammunition every day, and NATO can only resupply that with 100 or 200 or 500, he said many times, pretty soon they're going to run out of ammunition, and NATO is going to run out of its ability to supply Ukraine. So a couple of questions. Is Ukraine getting ammunition from any sources other than NATO? Does Ukraine produce its own ammunition, or have the Russians destroyed Ukraine's ability to do so? And you can't get blood from a stone, so how can they keep using more ammunition than what's coming in?
That's the first question. Ukraine has been getting some Soviet ammunition. I believe Pakistan is sending 10,000 Grad rockets, for example. Ukraine had some ammunition manufacturing capabilities, but I believe those were in the east, and they might have only been for small arms, and that's in territory that's either been destroyed or captured by Russia. The ammunition depletion is an issue. Part of the problem is that this is a military that was on Russian and Soviet standards in history, which is a large ammunition-consuming force that now is trying to transition to NATO. So while Ukraine uses, I believe the estimate is 6,000 artillery rounds a day compared to Russia using 20,000. Last I heard, all of Europe's artillery shell manufacturing capacity is about 20,000 a month. So every 4 days, Ukraine might be using as much as Europe usually produces an entire month. So that's the concern. This is largely an artillery war, and Ukraine will not be able to compete in artillery ammunition unless Europe really increases production.
Well, it's got to be a very serious concern. I mean, Secretary General Stoltenberg is President Zelensky's strongest, maybe after the president of Poland, strongest supporter in Europe. So he's not going to hold back, and he's not going to lie, and he's not going to exaggerate. For him to say, hey, you're using many times what we can supply you with, has to be a very serious concern for the Ukraine military, no?
It's certainly a concern. I'm not sure what the solution is. It's a force that has a limited amount of training, fights wars largely the same way Russia fights wars. They'll try to transition to NATO standards and NATO standards of operating and training. But, it's a large ammunition expenditure force. And there's not a lot of ways to change that mid-war. So Europe is going to have to increase production. It's not like Ukraine's really going to be able to limit the amount of ammunition they're using. It's just how they fight war here. And it's a hard habit to break. And, they would require a lot of training on other systems and a real rethinking of how they wage war in this part of the world.
Did I understand you to say that the Russians sell ammunition to the Pakistanis, and the Pakistanis have given some of that Russian ammunition to the Ukrainians? Is that what you said? Did I understand that correctly?
I saw a report that Pakistan was sending 10,000 Grad rockets to Ukraine. These could have been bought by Pakistan in the 1970s. I mean, this is when I was fighting in Libya, we were using Grad rockets. They were manufactured 70s and 80s. I mean, this is old ammunition that's been sitting around.
All right, so old ammunition for old equipment. Is this captured or deserted Russian equipment that the Ukrainians are now using against the Russians? I mean, if this stuff is circa 1970, it's older than most of the people who are firing it.
Right. Well, a lot of Ukraine's weapon systems were inherited from the breakup of the Soviet Union. A lot of Ukraine's military has been replenished actually by captured Russian tanks. I believe a few hundred Russian tanks have actually been captured by Ukraine or being refitted to be used against Russia now. A lot of this is old, but they really don't go bad. In Libya, we're using weapons that had decades on them, and the rounds usually worked. The weapons usually worked. The weapons I was using in Libya were 1970s and 80s, heavy machine guns and AKs. The stuff doesn't really go bad.
Okay. Okay. So America, as you may know, has been fixated on balloons in the past week, whether it's a Chinese weather balloon or, they don't like this phrase, but I'll use it anyway because we all use it, unidentified flying objects, and the military has shot them down. While that has happened, the investigative journalist, Cy Hirsch, he of My Lai massacre, Pentagon Papers, Watergate, Americans using torture, Pulitzer Prize fame, the best known American investigative journalist in the country, Bob Woodward notwithstanding, has reported that the Americans, with help from the Norwegians, destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline, the pipeline that enables Russia's Gazprom to sell cheap natural gas to Germany. That President Biden ordered the CIA and the Navy to line it with explosives, and then he ordered the CIA 3 months later to detonate it, and then the American PR machine said, well, Russia probably did this. So A, do you, with your inside knowledge of what's going on the ground, believe that Cy Hirsch is correct, that this was an American orchestrated job? And B, isn't this getting a little too close of an act of war, not only against Russia, but against an ally, Germany?
Well, I certainly hope the U.S. was responsible for it. It's what I always assumed was the case. I even assumed that they planned the explosives long before giving the order to detonate them. I mean, the main issue,
according to the article by Hearst, they did. They planted them 3 months before detonating. Why do you hope the U.S. attacked its ally, Germany? That's absurd.
Well, it's not so much attacking Germany as cutting off the supply of Russian gas to Europe. I mean, Germany's always been an issue with whether they were going to supply Ukraine and support European assistance to Ukraine based on their needs for natural gas and their energy needs. And taking that off the table was actually a good move by the United States to make that.
This is a war crime to attack a non-combatant in order to drive somebody else's economy into the ground. The result is no natural gas in the Netherlands, no natural gas in Germany, and cold winters for innocent human beings.
I mean, their natural gas needs are being met. People are not freezing to death in Europe, despite what Russian propaganda says. The issue was that Germany would be under a lot of political pressure, as well as other European countries domestically, if natural gas bills went up. That would be used as an excuse not to give aid to Ukraine, possibly not enough political support for leaders to give aid to Ukraine. Taking that off the table was something that was necessary to do to advance the cause of this war.
So President Putin was right when he said, why would we blow up our own pipeline? The Americans did it.
Right. It never made sense that he blew up his own pipeline. I mean, it's refreshing personally to see the CIA doing a little more James Bond and a little less post office, and getting back to what they used to do best. I mean, if Ronald Reagan was alive, he'd be quite proud of that operation, I think.
But you don't see it as a war crime, as an attack on an ally with which we have a treaty. I mean, the NATO treaty says if a NATO country is attacked, the other countries must defend it. I guess it never contemplated a NATO country being attacked by another NATO country.
Well, there's an attack on an undersea pipeline that supplies Russian natural gas. I don't believe Germany views it as an attack on Germany. I mean,
well, you might be right on that because they've been mysteriously silent. Germany is the economic power, Matt.
Okay.
Okay, you're back. All right.
Yeah.
I want to run you another clip. This is from the network News Nation with my former colleague, Chris Cuomo, interviewing what he says are teenage soldiers preparing for war. So there's a little bit of Chris narrating, and then there's a little bit of Q&A with a young man, a young Ukrainian man. He appears to be about 16, 17, 18 years old. His English is quite good, but there's subtitles anyway. So take a listen, Matt, and give us your thoughts.
Kids who have made a decision, 15, 16, 17, to put away their dreams and have only a single purpose of defending their country.
What does it mean to you, what you're learning how to do, and then actually having to go do it? Being out on the battlefield, you know what the reality is.
Have you witnessed the scariest part of our country, like Bucha, Kharkiv, Izium? So definitely I'm ready for that, but it's scary.
According to this, he's been on the front lines. Now you can guess how old he is. He's not 21 and he's not 13, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say he's 16, 17, or 18. Has Ukraine felt the need to conscript, induce, entice, whatever, people that young to join its forces?
No, they haven't, and it's against Ukrainian law. Ukrainian males 18 to 60 are eligible for military service. What Chris has done here is, I mean, I like Chris Cuomo, but really, this is a bit of sensational journalism. You could have taken that. You could have gone to a Junior ROTC camp right after 9/11 and interviewed American youth in middle school and high school who were in Junior ROTC and asked them the same questions, had the exact same report. It doesn't mean they're going in the military. It doesn't mean they're going to be deployed. It really just the same program that we have in the United States, Junior ROTC, middle school and high school.
This young kid said he was on the front lines and he witnessed the destruction of cities. Now, what would he be doing there? It's not a class trip.
He might have witnessed it if he came from those areas. He might have witnessed it on television. I mean, it's a kid talking. He was not fighting on the front lines. Nobody's being forcibly conscripted under 18. Nobody's serving under 18. It's just not happening.
Do they have, is there conscription in Ukraine for 18 and older, males?
There is some limited conscription. I actually know somebody who was my Uber driver who told me how he didn't want to go to war. And then a few weeks later, I saw him on a street corner and he came up to me and said that the police had called him and he'd been conscripted. And then I messaged him a few months later and he was having the time of his life. So, I mean,
having the time of his life in the military or out of the military?
In the military. Sent me photos. He was enjoying it, which shocked me because when he was in the Uber, he told me he never thought he would be able to fight or kill anybody. And now he's, living the life. So, there's some conscription, but there's still mostly volunteers. This is a country with a population of 40 million people.
You have and maybe it's from your personal observations,
a
radically different view of this than Americans. How could someone refer to a draftee in the Ukraine military as having the time of his life?
That's just
death and blood and gore.
Believe me,
it's not a summer resort.
Believe me, in most cases, that is not the opinion of most conscripts. But the one conscript that I know, it gave him purpose. It gave him camaraderie. He was actually pleased that he was serving his country. So it was a big change for him from driving an Uber just a few months before to being on an armored vehicle with people having a common purpose. I mean, anybody who served in conflict knows that feeling. That's what I'm referring to.
All right. In your travels, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Please finish.
I assume it's not the average conscript's feeling, but for a lot, it actually could turn out to be their feeling. You do have to talk to more conscripts. There's not a lot of conscripts compared to volunteers, though, at this stage in the war.
In your travels around Ukraine, and of course, we are deeply grateful for you coming on, particularly when you come on the program from places other than the relative safety of Kyiv. Have you come across your former colleagues? Have you come across American military out of uniform serving as trainers in the use of American equipment to the Ukrainian military?
Nobody who's working for the U.S. government. I don't even think there's any contractors here working for the Ukrainian government. It's all volunteer organizations like mine. There are no U.S. boots on the ground. I honestly wish there were.
Wait. The president himself has admitted that there are troops there out of uniform, and so has Secretary of Defense Austin. Are you telling me they're gone? They've come home? They went back to Poland?
I've seen none that are here serving in official capacity, doing any kind of training or other support. All the training that I'm aware that's going on is outside the country, where U.S. forces are training.
You told me before we came on air, when I said that my viewers love to hate you, but they watch you, which is why we put you on, and with, again, deep gratitude, that you received a donation from one of them. Who or what funds the Sons of Liberty International?
We're entirely funded by donations. Most of them come from Americans. Most of them are small donations. They're people that believe in this mission or believed in our past missions and have stuck with us for all these years.
Do American intelligence agencies like the CIA fund Sons of Thunder International?
No, and I don't even think we'd accept the money, quite honestly. We do quite well being independent with no strings attached. We obey laws, but otherwise nobody tells us what to do, and nobody's tried to tell us what to do.
Matt, you're a good man. You're a brave young man. We appreciate everything you do. Come back and visit us next week. Thank you for joining us.
Anytime. Thank you.
The Navy has recovered a significant portion of the antenna from the Chinese spy balloon shot down over the Carolina coast last week, but unanswered questions persist over the high-altitude objects recently seen flying over North America. The U.S. military shot down 3 objects in as many days over Alaska, Canada, and one of the Great Lakes.
We don't know what this exactly looked like, and again, we're still not sure exactly what the purpose of it was or who owned it.
John Kirby of the National Security Council addressing questions yesterday, and joining us now is CBS military analyst Jeff McCauslin. It's a treat to have you, sir. Great to have you as always on KMOX. There he is. There. Hi, Jeff. We got you now. How are you?
Pleasure with you, Tom.
Great to be with you. So what do we know at this point, Jeff? Are all of these objects that were shot down actually from China? Do we know that?
No, we do not know that at all. And I think it's very important to emphasize that particular fact because, quite candidly, as we kind of take a larger view of this, we have to understand that tensions between the United States and China, even before the so-called Chinese weather balloon was discovered, were very, very bad. Probably went worse in decades. A trip by Secretary of State Blinken was canceled in the consequence of discovery. And so those relations between the 2 biggest superpowers on the planet are probably worse now than at any time in our history, with the possible exception of the Korean War. So we need to really think about that and how we see a way perhaps to reduce tension with the Chinese. And that's why, for the time being at least, we should stress that the 3 subsequent objects that were shot down have not been identified as Chinese. The Chinese, by the way, admitted very early on that the surveillance balloon was in fact theirs. They have said nothing about these last 3 objects, but hopefully in the days ahead we'll get a better idea once the debris has been recovered. It does appear, from what I've seen back and forth, that the one over Alaska and the one over the Yukon were likely balloons. The one over Lake Huron, that seems to be the biggest mystery of all. It's described by somebody as octagonal in shape. The first one over Alaska also seems to be carrying a payload. That payload was substantially smaller than the one for the Chinese balloon, which was described about the size of 3 school buses. The one over Alaska, the size of a small car. And all of these other objects were flying at much lower altitudes, 40,000 feet. For the first 2, the one over Lake Huron at about 20,000 feet. And that's one reason why they were shot down, because at those altitudes, they're traveling at levels where commercial aircraft, civilian aircraft, might well be traveling and therefore present a hazard.
What is the response from China as you've gathered, and are they threatening to shoot down any objects over their territory?
They have said they were very angry when we shot this first one down off the coast of South Carolina. They said they would take similar action. It's unclear exactly what they meant by that in their final statement. In the last day or so, they have claimed that at least 10 U.S. balloons have flown over Chinese territory, which the White House has flatly denied as being true. That being said, I think there's some nuance that's important here, and that is what we believe to be Chinese territory, believe it or not. If we flew a balloon over Taiwan, for example, the Chinese would say that's Chinese territory. Or if we flew a balloon over an island, which they have done, they've built islands in the South China Sea to lay claims to the oceans around it. And if we flew over one of those islands, they would claim we were flying over Chinese territory, though no one in the world pretty much recognizes those things as sovereign territory of China.
I do believe that China did admit the first thing that was blown down. They said it was a weather balloon. Assuming it was a weather balloon, as a military analyst, what kind of information could be gained from a weather balloon, or what could it have been instead of a weather balloon? Yeah,
well, they did claim that, but it seems to me to be pretty transparent. I mean, a weather balloon, I'd have to guess, but I would imagine, that would track the north stream of the Arctic airstream, which, dips down and brings this cold weather down in Illinois and out here in Pennsylvania where I'm at. And then the summertime stays farther north, so it can track those air movements. It can track air density. It can track the weather and all that kind of stuff. And it does seem the Chinese have now employed a large number of balloons over 40 or 50 countries. That being said, it seems pretty clear that these are not weather balloons, or at least not solely weather balloons, but are for in fact, surveillance. And the Chinese military, in their writings, have talked for a long time about the possibility of balloons being useful because they travel at an altitude which is below the traditional altitudes we scan, looking for missiles, which are coming in, on a ballistic trajectory or fast-moving in metal, or the low altitude levels, which we're scanning, which are looking for incoming fighters, incoming bombers, which hug the ground a bit more. So there may be as the Pentagon now has described it, a domain awareness gap. Number one. Number two, they can dwell a while longer and therefore take pictures that have greater imagery as well as succeed over time. And they may be able to more easily eavesdrop on telephone conversations, radio conversations because of their lower altitude.
There have been fresh allegations from China, with the country accusing the United States of flying balloons over its airspace. Here's 9 News US correspondent Lauren Tomasi.
The White House has shut down claims from China that 10 US balloons have flown in its airspace since last year, officials saying no surveillance balloons are operated over China. It comes as 3 objects have been shot down by US jets in the past 3 days over Alaska, Canada and Michigan. Officials say at this stage they don't know what they are, where they came from, or what their purpose is.
Because we have not yet been able to definitively assess what these most recent objects are, we acted out of an abundance of caution to protect the security, our interest, and flight safety.
US officials are now working to obtain debris from all 3 objects. In the United States, Lauren Tomasi, 9 News.
It's believed a Sydney boy who died at a Fiji resort was electrocuted. The 8-year-old New Zealand national was found in the flower garden of the hotel last week and couldn't be saved. Police are investigating his cause of death. A 10-year-old girl has been rescued alive in Turkey after spending 183 hours trapped under the rubble. She'd been stuck in the ruins of an apartment block in the nation's south, which had collapsed in last week's earthquakes. More than 35,000 people have been killed in the disaster. Australians living on home care packages might be thousands of dollars worth off under updates to the program. Here's 9 News reporter Ella Smith.
The scheme is designed to encourage older people to stay in their homes by offering them cheaper services and medicines. The federal government has outlined what eligible Australians can claim in the $4.4 billion program. Medicines which aren't on the pharmaceuticals benefits scheme will no longer be subsidised for recipients, while expenses including climate control and allied services will be updated. The government has denied a change to the policy and says it's providers which are reassessing their services. Ella Smith, 9 News.
Qantas is trying to rehire some of the staff made redundant or who quit during the pandemic. An email obtained by Ben Fordham from the Flying Kangaroo to former employees asks them to consider making a return, saying the airline is operating in very different circumstances. The carrier is trying to recruit 1,500 staff by the end of the year. We're being asked to shop local this Valentine's Day. It's one of the busiest days of the year for florists, with sales forecast to hit $200 million. About 10 million flowers have been imported. Flower Industry Chief Executive Anna Jabar wants people to ask for locally grown blooms instead.
We are really encouraging the community to buy locally grown Australian flowers from local florists and to support small business and local families.
To the markets, the Australian dollar buying 69.6 US cents.